We're at the beginning of a new wave of research. Our creative powers are being stretched. We're learning surprising things about how we sense the world around us. Exploring the mysteries of the spoken word.
This is Tim O'Brien from Seattle on November 8th, 2025. And what you just heard was the intro music from a video called The Incredible Machine. I'll be talking more about that as soon as we're done with today's news. Today's security story is about Cloudflare. Cloudflare is scrubbing the Isuru botnet from its top domains list. And this was reported by Brian Krebs on Security, on November 5th. So for the past week, something bizarre has happened in Cloudflare's public ranking of the most frequently requested websites. Domains controlled by the massive Isuru botnet were outranking Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. The botnet's command and control servers were literally sitting at positions number 1 and number 3 on this list of the internet's most popular domains. Cloudflare responded by redacting the malicious domains from their rankings. And CEO Matthew Prince confirmed what many had suspected. Isuru's operators were using the botnet to game the rankings while simultaneously attacking Cloudflare's DNS service. Isuru is a rapidly growing botnet made of hundreds of thousands of hacked IoT devices. And we reported on this earlier this week. These are poorly secured routers and security cameras, just about anything. It's demonstrated the ability to launch record-breaking DDoS attacks approaching 30 terabits of data per second. Until recently, Isuru used Google's DNS servers at 8.8.8.8, but in early October it switched to Cloudflare's 1.1.1.1. That's when things got weird. The botnet started generating so many DNS queries that its control domains shot to the top of Cloudflare's popularity rankings. And here's why this matters. Cloudflare's domain rankings are widely used across the internet for trust and safety determinations. This is by browsers, by DNS resolvers, by safe browsing APIs. Services like Tranco use it. It aggregates the top domain lists from multiple providers. So when a malicious domain shows up in the top 10, a lot of these systems naively assume that it's safe and trusted. One Isuru domain that sat at number 1 for days was literally someone's street address in Massachusetts, followed by .com. So this really isn't what you'd expect to see next to Amazon and Google. The botnet controllers are also heavily using the .su top-level domain, and that's from the former Soviet Union. Now that brings up my own question, which is, why does the Soviet Union, something that doesn't exist, have a top-level domain? If you want a simple way to detect the Isuru activity on your network, maybe one of the first steps is to set an alert for any systems trying to connect .su domains. Blocking that entire top-level domain is unlikely to cause any legitimate complaints. Now, if you want more information, I would encourage you to go to Krebs on Security. You can see the link in the show notes. Today's programming news is Valdi. Snapchat open-sourced a cross-platform UI framework. It's on their GitHub repository, and you can see that they open-sourced it 2 days ago on the 6th of November. Now, it's a new cross-platform UI framework, and it's different from React Native or Flutter because it's a different approach to how these mobile apps are built and deployed. This framework promises native performance without sacrificing developer velocity. And Snapchat, importantly, uses it in production. And so what makes Valdi different is that it provides this unified API and it compiles the code you write to truly native components. When you run a Valdi application, it's not running with a JavaScript bridge or a web view. It's generating actual native iOS and Android UI components. So think of it like C++ compiling to different architectures. The timing of this release is also particularly interesting. It's a few days after one of the most severe vulnerabilities ever with the React Native development tool Metro. But we're also seeing a broader trend where companies are getting burned by the limitations of existing cross-platform frameworks. Flutter is great until you need deep platform integration, and React Native works until performance becomes critical. Valdi is Snapchat's answer after years of building one of the most performance-sensitive mobile apps in existence. They have really intense requirements and a really impatient audience. So they need smooth animations, instant camera access, and AR filters that run at 60 frames per second. So not only is it new, it's proven. If you want to check it out, go to their GitHub repository. There's a link in the show notes. and you can see that they just open sourced it under the MIT license. Today's Weird Bucket story is awesome. So the title is, My Friends and I Accidentally Faked a Ryzen 7 9700X3D Link, and the internet believed it. So you can go look at this story if you see the links in the show notes, but it's a story about how somebody fooled the entire tech industry. The report here is that a group of friends just confessed that they accidentally created one of the biggest hardware leaks of the year, except that the hardware didn't exist. They faked the benchmarks for the AMD's unreleased Ryzen 7 9700X3D processor, uploaded it to an online benchmark database, and watched as tech news sites, YouTubers, industry analysts treated it as it were a legitimate leak. So the process was shockingly simple, as they document. Online benchmark databases like CPU-Z and Geekbench allow anyone to submit results, and they have almost no verification process. And I just love this. The group created plausible-looking specifications for a CPU that AMD hasn't announced. They ran these fake benchmarks on modified hardware. They reported a fake CPU name and uploaded the results. Within hours, screenshots started circulating on Twitter and Reddit, and within days, major tech publications were analyzing leaked performance numbers and speculating about the roadmap. From the comment in Reddit, some media outlets even started making things up in an attempt to seem informed. Tech Power Up wrote, quote, current rumors suggest it will feature a 120-watt TDP, targeting the same $400 to $450 range as its predecessor. The commenter said, that wasn't specified anywhere at all. Video cards also suggested the same thing, but they also correctly recognized that the clocks seemed to be way too high. Back to this Reddit commenter, I have no idea how these rumors started, but it scares me that it only took less than a week before people started making things up. So this is back to me. What's fascinating is how this reveals the fragility of the tech news cycle. And I think it's fascinating. I just took a break and Googled it and tried to see who fell for it and if it had any impact on the AMD stock price. And this story is only 16 hours old. You can see it all over the web. There's all these sites that just took the benchmark and just republished it without even asking questions, without having an expert on staff. I think this also maybe points to a problem in technology news. Most of the people reporting technology news don't know technology and don't even know enough to know what they don't know. So I sort of love this story, but I would not encourage other people to go publish fake benchmarks. But it does outline a problem that we have. It's one of the reasons I started this podcast is because most technology news out there is just people parroting something that they heard. And I just want to take this time to remind you that this podcast, my commitment is I'm going to understand everything that I'm reporting. And if there's a detail that I don't understand, I'll identify that. And like I did yesterday, I'll stop and investigate it. And when I investigate it, one of my jobs is also to explain it to you. As an example, the NVIDIA story from yesterday. I use NVIDIA GPUs all the time, but I didn't know what the FP4 4-bit floating point standard was or how it worked. So I went and I learned about it, and I used that effort to help educate the people listening to this podcast. I think the thing that we don't see, the fact that all of these sites have been scammed into reporting a fake CPU, is that technology news doesn't exist. No one does this. Now, there are exceptions. Krebs is one of them. Krebs on security. He's an expert in security, but he also takes time to explain it. So anyway, that's my lecture for today. I think that this Weird Bucket story today is a symptom of a larger disease, and that disease is that we don't actually invest in technology journalists. In fact, journalism overall is facing a broad challenge. So anyway, for more links about this prank, see the links in the show notes. Other news today, China has resumed shipping some critical automotive semiconductors after a brief export ban. This eases immediate firms of a global chip shortage. According to the New York Times, German automotive supplier Nexperia announced it was again allowed to export chips that Beijing had temporarily barred. Following intense diplomatic pressure, the incident highlighted how European automakers remain vulnerable to supply chain disruptions caught between the U.S.-China trade tensions, with companies now scrambling to diversify their chip sourcing beyond Chinese-controlled suppliers. 7 families filed lawsuits against OpenAI claiming that ChatGPT encouraged their relatives' suicides and caused severe mental health crisis. The New York Times reports the complainants allege the chatbot engaged in dangerous conversations, including detailed discussions of suicide methods, and encouraged harmful delusions. The lawsuits represent an escalating legal challenge for AI companies around the safety of conversational AI, particularly regarding vulnerable users experiencing mental health crisis. Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan announced a major restructuring of their philanthropic organization, with the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative pivoting towards artificial intelligence and scientific research. The New York Times reports the restructured organization, called BioHub, will focus on AI-driven scientific discovery and research acceleration. The shift reflects how major tech philanthropists are increasingly viewing AI as the primary tool for solving humanity's biggest challenges, from disease research to climate change. And lastly, major news organizations are grappling with how to use AI in newsrooms, with some embracing automation while others ban it entirely. The New York Times reports the industry is experiencing soul-searching about AI's potential to write articles, generate headlines, and fact-check stories, versus fears it will hallucinate facts and undermine journalism's credibility. This debate has created a patchwork of approaches. Some outlets are using AI for routine tasks like sports scores and earnings reports, while others prohibit any AI-generated content whatsoever. This reflects a deep uncertainty about AI's role in journalism. That's the technology news for November 8th, 2025. If you're interested in any of these stories, again, see the show notes for links. Okay, so it's week 2, and I usually do a review on Saturday. I'm going to keep this one quick, but I had some good episodes this week. On Monday, I covered meteors. What if a meteor exploded over Northern Virginia, as did happen in Russia in 2013? What would that do to data centers? Wanted to make people realize that AWS outage we had 2 weeks ago, that was absolutely nothing. Something bad could actually happen, and we need to prepare. The other thing is right after that, I wrote a piece on aviation technology, and I talk about Misery Map. Misery Map is from FlightAware. It's one of the most relevant things you can know about right now. Because with the lack of air traffic controllers, they're starting to cancel all the flights. Misery Map is a real quick way to go look and see what's happening across the entire country. The other thing that episode touched upon is like how some airports are starting to use AI for air traffic control now, and that could either make you feel better or worse depending on your perspective. And then on Thursday, I recorded an episode about how hackers are after developer laptops and what you can do about it. Those 3 episodes, I'd say, were the highlight of the week, and they're each very long. They took a huge amount of effort. I got some feedback also this week from people that some of my recordings are a bit too choppy. Not from a stuttering perspective, because I have one of those, but in terms of editing, like I'm making them too fast. I might be speaking too intensely, like I'm doing right now, by the way. Also, my wife is an acting coach. She studied at the Piven School for multiple decades, and her input was, I'm using the complaint too much, and I need to use more of the admit. I don't know what that means, but I'm trying as best I can. And on some of the episodes this week, I slowed down a little bit and tried to get more of a message across as a statement and less of a complaint. The other feedback I got from an individual last night who will remain nameless, but I was telling him, this is so much effort. I don't know if I can do this every day. And frankly, I probably won't continue to do that. I've had some unanticipated free time over the last 2 weeks, and I've decided to take advantage of that. But that might change soon. And when it does, I'll probably dial back to about once a week, maybe twice a week. But I won't be doing 5 days of full feature-length podcast stories. That's a little bit too much effort. But his advice was, keep it going, and don't worry if your technical topics are too technical for the general audience. There's some deep geek going on here, is what he said, and that's a good thing. So, you know who you are if you're listening. I'm going to take that advice, and I'm going to drill into some more technical topics. And one of the things I'm looking into now is some big stories. One of them is tracking the evolution of Unix to Linux to what we have now, which is Linux is just ubiquitous. The other is a story on what is technology journalism. And I hinted at a little bit about that in our news coverage today, but I have some analysis about what's the problem we're facing with technology journalism and what is journalism. I think it's a conversation that's long overdue. But the one thing I want to talk about today, I was doing some research into the origins of Unix. And if we think about Unix, we think about this thing that was created by Bell Labs in the late 60s, early 70s. And we don't really have a human picture of what that time was like. So I've been trying to find out more about the people who invented it, who were they, what was their experience, but also what was the experience of people in the culture that surrounded that invention. And I found a couple things that are really interesting. There's this film that I stumbled upon on YouTube, and it was the opening music for this episode. But the YouTube film is called The Incredible Machine.
These men are design engineers at Bell Telephone Laboratories, the research and development part of the Bell system. They're about to engage a new breed of computer called Graphic 1 in a dialogue that will test the ingenuity of both men and machine. It's a new way of working out abstract problems in the age-old medium of drawings and designs, which explains why the technique is called computer graphics.
And it's this 1968 promotional Bell Labs film that showcases computer technology. And I'm watching a lot of these promotional films, and they're so wonderful because they're like unintentional comedy. It's like the most serious-looking people in suits with dramatic lighting. And they're not actors. It's not like they paid people to do this promotional film for them. They're just people that worked at Bell Labs. And literally, you can tell someone's like, put on a suit tomorrow and be ready to be serious because you really need to show the gravitas of computing. And so you've got these guys sitting in front of what was a PDP-7 in 1968. And this thing looks like it's about to launch a nuclear missile, but they're there like using a light pen to manipulate circuits on the screen. And they're talking to each other with this contrived back and forth like, John, what do you think of this design? I think this is a fascinating design. Why don't we execute it? And then someone presses a big execute button. And it's just so 1950s. But this was 1968, 1973 or so. And that's where it really gets interesting because then music starts playing. And it's not unlike the music I listen to today. Like something that sounds like Hooked on Bach starts playing. It's computer-generated music.
Now a deck of punch cards with all the cues typed in is fed into the computer, winding up as a reel of recorded tape.
Hey, Bernie?
Yes, sir.
Hi, I've got another V-Flix movie here on 2 reels. Can you possibly do it now?
Sure can.
Great,
No
that's
problem.
the second half.
And about 9 minutes and 12 seconds into it, a title card proudly announces, the entire music score of this film was created using a Bell Labs computer. And then at like 10 minutes into it, the computer sings Daisy Bell, which is a song I remember hearing in the movie 2001.
Can also be used for speech, and we can find out a great deal by studying these simpler sounds.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer too.
And it's creepy, but it's just a weird picture. And I just encourage all of you to go to the show notes and click on the link and watch this YouTube film because parts of it are really, really funny. There's like this 5-minute period where they're trying to get the computer to speak. And it's like, would you like your coffee? And they're like, I think we should put more emphasis on the F and the E. And then someone else says, I'll get right on it. And then they change some waveform. But when I say waveform, it's like a bunch of dots on a screen that's more primitive than anything you can even imagine. So this thing is part interesting because you see these ideas that I think were abandoned, but also it's a picture of like computing is a serious thing. And we are going to engage in computing to improve humanity. And there was this real focus on corporate, science, government, and computers were super expensive. And if you watch this video, it's interesting. I think they're using a PDP-5, possibly a PDP-7. This was a cheaper computer for 1968. It only cost $79,000. And just to put that in perspective, present value of $79,000 from 1968 would be about $800,000. So that's not cheap, but it was a cheaper computing alternative to IBM. An IBM mainframe would be like a $2 to $3 million expense back then. And I'm not even going to calculate how much that would be worth now because it seems like it would be far more than $800,000. But imagine having $800,000 to spend for a computer that has 100,000 flops. That's floating point operations per second. Your phone has about 10 million times the computing power of this thing. But still, watch this video because it was doing some pretty impressive things, or at least that was the story they were trying to sell you.
Is a very complicated process no one fully understands.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep.
Those words were spoken by a digital computer, programmed to simulate a speaking machine.
But there's so much fascinating culture in this video, and you can see it. Honestly, some of the music they're playing still sounds awesome. I'm like, how do I get this music? I want to listen to this. And that Daisy Bell song, which I would sing it for you, but I don't want to freak you out. That's not just a cute demo. In 1961, Bell Labs researchers made a computer sing that song. Arthur C. Clarke visited Bell Labs in 1962 and heard it. And when he and Stanley Kubrick made 2001: A Space Odyssey, released in 1968, they used that same song that Bell Labs had created. So that same song that you can hear in this video inspired HAL 9000 to sing Daisy Bell as it was being shut down. So it's just interesting to find these artifacts from the past and relate them to things that have influenced you. But the other thing that's fascinating in retrospect, it's totally theater, like corporate futurism designed to impress investors and government funders. And we're surrounded by that today. Like part of the film in 1968 talks about monitoring satellites and using computers to do, important things. And what gets me as I look into the history of Unix, and this is what really kills me, Bell Labs, big corporate company trying to push this image of how focused they are on the future. And they had a facility in Murray Hill, New Jersey, and two guys in their 20s. Ken Thompson was 26, Dennis Ritchie was 28, and they were sitting there saying, I want to create an operating system. They tried to get it funded. They tried to get their project funded, but Bell Labs was like, no, right? They're like, we don't have time for this work you want to do. This is not how we do business. So while you see these men in suits using these sleek pens to draw on screens, you've got Thompson and Ritchie sitting in a room. They found a PDP-7 that was abandoned, and they started working on this thing that they think they really needed. They wrote PDP-7 assembler code. They created these commands that you're using right now, ls, cat, mv. They didn't have a terminal. They essentially had a typewriter. So watch this video and you'll see like a graphical circular screen. You weren't typing into a keyboard and seeing your characters echo on the screen like we do now. You were typing a character into a keyboard and then a printer would print it out. There was no backspace key, right? So they had to write all this assembly code with this teletype approach. It took forever to type characters. So that's one of the main reasons why the ls command isn't called list, because they would have had to wait another couple of seconds for the I and the T. They had no camera crews, no dramatic lighting. In fact, they were told not to do their projects. It was one of those after hours, weekends things. They invented Unix even after management told them not to. And I think watching this video and watching this sort of image of the future and what's happening and how we're going to change everything, and knowing that there were two guys in New Jersey breaking the rules, that's the thing that really changed computing. They invented Unix in PDP-7 assembler code. I've actually downloaded it and looked at it. I actually used Claude Sonnet just yesterday to analyze it and tell me what it did, which is also ridiculous, right? I'm using Claude Sonnet, something that's probably running on a huge cluster that's rated in exaflops, quintillions of floating point operations per second, to help me analyze code that was written in assembler that ran on a platform that had maybe 100,000 flops. And it's really interesting because this LLM actually understands the code, understands what all the different things are doing. It taught me how the initial implementation of ls worked. The initial ls, the initial mv, the initial cat, those were written in assembly code. They were only later moved over to C. In fact, originally they were going to move to B, right? And B was an interpreted language. And then someone said, no, let's move to C. It should be compiled because it'll be faster. And then there's a whole nother story about how the initial Unix code, I was like, well, what was the license discussion like? And I was looking through all of the history. They worked for Bell Labs. The original Unix wasn't licensed as much as it was given. There was a small licensing fee, but I think it was $150. You see, Bell Labs had an antitrust consent decree from 1956. It was not allowed to sell software. So that essentially contributed to open source, right? That consent decree from 1956 put Bell Labs in a situation where they could invent a new operating system, but they weren't going to make a lot of money off of it because they weren't allowed to sell software. Carry that forward 2 decades, And that's something that influenced the creation of the Free Software Foundation and ultimately the creation of Linux. So there's all these things happening around the invention of Unix. There's this disconnect between corporate marketing and reality. The music in this video is also amazing because it makes you think of Clockwork Orange. It makes you think of Hooked on Bach or Switched on Bach, Wendy Carlos. Kraftwerk would form in 1970, only 2 years later. And the cultural transformation that was happening is just interesting to think about. So anyway, I'll have more on this. I'm working on a larger series about the history of Unix, but I just want to leave you with that for this weekend. So really the thing about this weekend is watch this Incredible Machine video and just think about the fact that these machines had 8 kilobytes of RAM, kilobytes. The emoji that you share in a text message is 4 kilobytes, right? But these machines could store 8 kilobytes. They had a cycle time of 1.25 microseconds, which was impressive, right? They could do about 100,000 floating point operations a second, about 500,000 additions a second. And again, like your Apple Watch beats it by a factor of 5 million. Some of the new clusters, like Microsoft just put 64 racks of B300 NVIDIA chips in the same place. I think it's 92.1 exaflops. That's 92.1 quintillion things a second. So as I do research into this story and watch these movies, A, they're funny because you can see all the bad corporate acting. And B, it's amazing how far we've come in 53, 55 years, but then you'll also see the similarities. I feel like I recognize some of the people sitting at this this PDP-7 in 1968, the way that they talk to each other, the way that they engage as engineers. And I think that we miss that a lot. While our technology has grown by leaps and bounds, we're still the same people.